It's working? Okay. All right, good evening. Thank you for coming this evening. Appreciate the fact that it's only a couple days after Labor Day and some people are still in summer mode. Probably some people are still on vacation too, by the looks of it, because we're missing some key people, but that's okay. We're along with it. Yesterday we made a presentation to the town board. Ramona, I hope that all of you found it to be acceptable. And good. That's good. Glad to hear that. And we're going to get a presentation tonight from Code Studio, and I will turn it over to Lee.
I appreciate that. So, Annette, who is with Home Run Creative, has prepared a video for the project, which I'm going to start by showing because it's kind of in front of everything else I want to show you. So take a deep breath and let's watch the show here. Hold on, let me see if I can get this done. Play from the start. Ta-da!
There's excitement in the air.
We need to think beyond what's here right now. We need to think about what's coming.
With a combination of expert guidance, strong committee participation, and public input, the Imagine Amherst initiative seeks to give the town planning department the information it needs to successfully update the town's comprehensive plan and zoning code.
They're making an attempt to organize better so that when something does come up, ideas need to flow so that people can make changes.
It helps create a shared dialogue that can be used later. And there's people that were there that say, yeah, we were part of that conversation. This is what ended up getting written, but this is what was discussed that led to that.
Change will happen, but we'll have to determine, what we want to see and expect for us to be proactive.
Where are the folks that are going to come after us going to want? That's what gets cities into trouble or gets places into trouble, is not thinking about what people are going to want in the future.
Come be a part of the discussion. Join the charrette, any of a series of workshops this September 22nd through the 28th. Stay connected through social media and let us know what's important to you. Imagine Amherst in the future. Preserve, predict, progress.
Anyone?
There's excitement in the air.
We need to think beyond what's here right now. We need to think about what's coming.
With a combination...
So that's the video. I'm glad you guys got a chance to see it. We're going to post it. It'll go out and be part of the social media campaign to try to get people to join us for the charrette. So it's just a little something to maybe tease people into being interested in the project, and we're hopeful it'll have a positive impact. So the first thing I want to talk about, as you guys always do, I want to talk about what the project status is. So this is the scope and schedule that we shared with the town board. It doesn't look exactly like Dan's, but it is. The content is exactly the one you've been seeing from Dan. So project initiation is completed. The analysis almost completed. The one piece missing still here is the analysis of the existing regulations, which won't be finished up until after the charrette has been held, a couple weeks after the charrette has been held. And we're headed towards the preparation of the plan amendment and the zoning amendment. We have targeted the end of the year for the plan amendment, and by March of next year for the zoning amendment, and hopefully it's in the adoption process by June of next year. So just a reminder, we're in some ways about halfway through. Certainly when we get done with the charrette, we will have a strong sense of where we're headed in both thinking about the plan amendment, the hierarchy of the centers, and the kind of zoning that might implement that. So that's just a little bit on the status. The next thing I want to share is, does anybody have any questions about where we are in the scope? So I wanted to help you guys understand a little bit about what the charrette process is really like. So I brought you some imagery from a charrette that we ran in Chattanooga. So it's not exactly right, but this was a 5-neighborhood charrette. We're dealing actually with 6 locations in this charrette. Many of you have in front of you, did we give them the sites? Are they there somewhere? No. The one with they are, you're right. But I was thinking of the map. Hold on. 2 seconds. Here. Here. So, these are our 6 pilot centers. This group talked with me over the phone. We selected some centers. We, in the end, modified 2 of them in further discussion because we started mapping out where they were in the community and which aspects of the new zoning we were going to try to figure out using each of them. And we decided that, unfortunately, we had to second-guess the working committee a little bit. And I'll apologize for that we didn't have the time to come back to you and talk about that a little bit. But basically, we went back to the west edge of the village, and we went away from Kensington back to using both the Key Bank site in Eggertsville and then Snyder. So in combination to replace the Kensington site that the committee had preferred. So right now, and having survived the town board meeting last night, I think for the purpose of the charrette in 2 weeks time, now we'll be using Northbound Plaza, Eggertsville. As I say, the main focus there will be on the Key Bank site and maybe some of the immediately surrounding properties. The core of Snyder there at Harlem and Main, west of the village, Main and Forest being kind of the key intersection there. Transit Road south of Main. This is where the small, shallow parcels are south of Main. And then the Gettsville site up on Millersport Highway. There has been significant change just in the last 2 days on that. I don't know if you guys have been following, but ITT is gone. So they were basically shut down by the federal government as to their funding for their students. They were no longer allowed to receive federal government funds, Pell Grants, etc., and so they shut their whole school down. So across the country, ITT is gone. So that key tenant is gone. So maybe that's a more interesting site. Maybe it's a less interesting site. I'm not quite certain which. Before, we would have sort of had the engagement of the student population. Now we don't have that opportunity, but we have one more vacant site and a way to think about maybe what that might be. So that's the set of sites that we're going to be talking about. We've got this exercise in which we're going to try to figure out the future of some of those sites with regard to how they might be zoned. And so this little bit of show is just an example from another similar exercise. If you grab this sheet, which is the schedule, I'm basically going to walk you through the days of the charrette from left to right there, so that you understand what each of those events are, which ones are supposed to be for you to be engaged or the public to be engaged in, which are the times of technical work, etc. I think one of the key things to say about this is the public is welcome at any of this except the spot where you see that we're closing the studio for 5 hours in the afternoon there, and that's simply to make sure that we get our presentation ready for that night. It's not because there's any secret meetings going on. It's pure production on our part. Otherwise, we'll be designing in public that entire time. You're welcome to drop in at any time. Anyone from the community is welcome to drop in at any time. But key elements of the public process. First and foremost, the hands-on design session. This is the #1 event that we want to get the general public to come to. Why is that? Because this is early in the formulation stage of our ideas about what's going on during the course of the charrette. This is helping us understand each of these targeted pilot areas so that we can think through how they might be treated with new zoning. And so it'll be an exercise in which there'll be a short presentation. We're going to talk about precedent sites a little bit later on, and the presentation will draw from those precedent sites as examples for specific sites in town to kind of link what has been built in some other communities with what could be built in certain places here. So we'll talk a little bit more about those precedents in the second half of tonight's meeting. But the first thing we do is do a little presentation. We often call it food for thought, because what it helps to do is helps inspire people in thinking about these kinds of places. What are you talking about? We don't have any place in town like that now. Well, this is thinking about kinds of places that you might have in the future and whether they seem appropriate to you in these specific locations or not. So part of that exercise, there'll be two exercises that morning. There'll be one of citywide or townwide significance, which is to say that we've got to look at this hierarchy for how we're going to talk about each of these centers in the future. So right this minute, we're using a hierarchy based mostly on form, right? We were talking about deep parcels, large parcels, versus shallow parcels being quite different. That the traditional nodes like Eggertsville and Snyder were quite different than the suburban nodes, places like Hopkins and Dodge, etc. So we'll be using some of that and creating a draft map for people to respond to. Is this the way you in the community think about these places? Do you think this is a more intense place than we have said? Do you think it should be less intense than we have suggested? You know, how should it be treated in the future? And that exercise will be something that everybody does at all of the tables in the same way, and then we'll talk to each other about our results from that. That'll be the first exercise in the morning. The second exercise in late morning will actually take you down to a specific location. We'll use those 6 pilot sites, and we'll be talking about those specific locations, and we'll be learning what people would be worried about if new development were coming in those places. What kinds of things would they like to see there? What would be an addition to Snyder? What would be an addition to Gettsville, right? What would be great if it were built there? We'll be talking about all those kinds of things with the community. Once we've completed that conversation again, then the tables report back to each other. This is someone reporting back. So here's the maps, right, all marked up with comments from the general public. One of the key things is you put the marker in the public's hands, right? It's not the facilitator, it's not me writing and drawing these things, it's the community. It's very important to the buy-in into the project that this be the message of the community and that it be carried forward all the way until we're done with the zoning. So here you see I'm listening to the report back that this gentleman is doing from his table about the 3 biggest ideas that they talked about at their table. The fascinating thing that typically happens is during the course of that conversation, right, they might come back and actually suggest that they're all talking about many of the same things. And when you hear that from a table that's filled with residents, and a table that has some developers at it, and another table that has old people, and a table that has young people, when you start to hear these similar themes, then we know we're kind of onto something that the community is interested in. So that's really what we're looking for here. So what you're seeing here is one of those sessions being held for a specific neighborhood in Chattanooga. So we'll be flopping down, Snyder on the table on one table, Gettsville on another. If you're more interested in Gettsville, you can sit at that table for the second half of the exercise, right? So that would be the morning of the first day of the charrette. In the afternoon, we've agreed to have neighborhood meetings. By the way, there are some other ways during that morning meeting that we gain information. Some people aren't willing to talk very much, right? Some people would rather write you or speak their mind separately. So one of the things we do is we let them fill out a little word card. In this case, how do you feel about the place now, and how would you like to feel about it in the future, right? So unaffordable living and tiny friendly. This is a community, and this was a person probably interested in tiny houses. which is a big movement in Chattanooga towards smaller houses. Fun place to live, public restrooms and two-story grocery store, you know, a vision for the future, right? So we collect information in that way. We also collect comment cards at the end, sort of an exit survey of you know, what did you hear that you liked this morning, what did you hear that you didn't like, so that people can respond to that anonymously and not have to be involved in something that might make that a tussle with their neighbors or whatever else. Normally we would begin immediately brainstorming, but in deference to the fact that the Bills are playing on Sunday afternoon, when we would normally hold these individual meetings that you see here for each of the centers, those would normally be held after we had done a little thinking about the place. But in fact, we're not going to have that opportunity here. So what we're proposing to do is run the individual neighborhood meetings that afternoon right after we've had a break for lunch. So you'll see that those, in order to run the 5 separate meetings that we've got to do, those will run from 1 o'clock until about 7 o'clock at night on Saturday. These are more targeted discussion of the issues in these specific areas and what some ideas might be for how to resolve some of those issues in the future. If we're going to have development, what kind should it be, and what kinds of impacts are you worried about, and how could we mitigate those? How could we use zoning as a tool to actually make that development a positive thing for the community instead of a negative? So that'll be the end of the conversation on Saturday then. The design team then on Sunday will spend their time brainstorming. This is something that the public is welcome to drop in and out of. We'll be working for the most part in the Harlem Road Community Center. So we'll have a space in there throughout this whole week where the public is welcome to come in at any time. Doors are unlocked, adequate parking, et cetera, et cetera. So come on in and, comment. If you feel like you couldn't get there on Saturday, but you had, 30 minutes on Sunday afternoon, you can drop by. So that'd be Sunday, will be mostly spent on sort of brainstorming concepts for each of the project areas. During the course of the week, we're actually running 2 lunch and learns. They're in these lunch slots on Monday and Tuesday. The lunch and learn concept is, hey, you got a bunch of experts in town, you might as well wring them dry. You might as well ask them a bunch of questions. And so the first discussion will be one that I'll run on form-based codes and sort of the trend in zoning and where we might be headed in thinking about new kinds of rules and how other communities are using those tools. The second one on Tuesday, which I suspect many of you would be fascinated by, is there's some recent work being done by Dave Purcell, did I get his name right? Purcell, who is doing some analytic work on the market here, especially with a focus on office development, and looking pretty seriously at what the future might be and how strong the present is, because that's not even something we happen to know right this minute. So his information will be hot off the presses. This is a report that will exist only in draft form at that time, and we'll get a little chance to preview that during the lunch and learn. The idea of these, again, is just drop into the Harlem Road Community Center, bring your lunch with you, or sit through it and listen to your tummy growl. That's okay, too. But bring your lunch with you, sit around. There'll be about 30 minutes of presentation and 30 minutes or so for a question and answer. So it's a great chance to actually topically drill down into these 2 particular issues. So in addition to the lunch and learn, then, there will be a series of stakeholder meetings. And while they don't show up on this version of the schedule, we have an internal version of the schedule that we are working to fill out, which I can't find right off the bat. But basically every hour, kind of on the hour, throughout Monday and Tuesday, except when we're running the open houses, we're actually going to run stakeholder meetings. What do I mean by stakeholder meetings? Well, some of the stakeholders will have been there Saturday afternoon. People who live near each of these centers and want to come and speak their mind about them. Some other kinds of stakeholders that are important for us to talk to. We got to talk to the development community. We have to talk to the designers, planners, engineers who work on projects in the town, the kinds of people who come and help other people through the process. We probably got to talk to a variety of town staff. We're going to be talking about questions like access to sites and bulk and mass of buildings, and so, we're going to be talking to people from the building department about how we might try to get at some of the tough questions that they're trying to deal with when they're dealing with development now today under the current code. What could we fix under the new code? So there'll be a series of stakeholder meetings held, hopefully from all of the perspectives that need to be in the room. So if you think you have an idea about what one of those ought to be, we could talk a little bit about that today and try and squeeze it into the schedule. As I suggested, the design studio is open. Yes, we have work to get done, and most of the designers will be working most of the time. But we'll have staff around periodically, and there'll be members of the team that will always be available to talk to someone who walks into the studio. So there's always going to be a chance to come in and talk about your property, your issues, whatever it is. There will always be a time, and someone will always take a break and come over and talk to you. In addition to the open design studio, then, the actual work is occurring. And in this case, we are doing a much broader project. So the area that was being worked on was quite large. So we didn't work in 3D at all. We really just worked in 2D and looked at footprints and an understanding of sort of how buildings would fit on the site. And so that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing these black buildings are what we would call keepers, buildings that we decided were likely to still be there in 20 years, and then the others become sites to design something for. And we want to design adequate parking for whatever we're showing on the site. So it's really an exercise of going through and doing conceptual design for some of these sites to make sure that we understand what fits. Because there is nothing worse than telling the development community, you can have 8 stories on that site, but then, giving them a site that functionally you could never build more than 3 stories on. Because they're going to come and ask for more because they'll probably have paid for land at a price that equals 8 stories of stuff, unless they're really smart, in which case they designed the building for it before they bought it. But this conceptual work that is going on, that helps us set the rules for zoning. So it helps us figure out where's the parking going to be on these sites. How do we keep that infill development in character with what's in the surrounding context? How do we transition that development to the immediate neighbors? So thinking that through at this sort of conceptual site planning level. Now, we're not saying this is exactly how you have to build development. It's just one way that would probably follow the kinds of rules that we would be developing. So it is a chance for us to think and talk about individual places and concepts for those places. Our open house will be on Monday and not on Tuesday. We are holding 2 sets of open houses. We were worried about catching the people who might not come to an evening open house. So while we are trying to get out into the community for the evening open houses, and they will be held around the town, the actual early one is going to be held all in one place at the Wyndham. So at the Wyndham, you'll be able to see all of the centers in the afternoon if you drop through, or in the evening, the Wyndham will be used for the west of the village area, and the other ones include, right now, the IDA would do Eggertsville and Snyder. Northtown, we haven't locked in yet. Gettsville, we're going to use the ITT Institute. We're scrambling right now to find a new location for that one. Transit Road is going to be at the main transit fire hall. So each of these we're trying to take sort of to the people, if you will. The open house, the important part about this is not a thing you come to for 2 hours. Well, you could, if you're really wonky and into this stuff. You can hang around for the whole 2 hours if you feel like it. It's really a drop-in, as it's called. So you can come by and spend 10 minutes, look at the drawings, get comfortable that, you think we're doing the right thing, or, get wired up and call all your neighbors and tell them to get their butt down there and look at this crazy stuff these guys from Texas are doing. Whatever that open house gets used for is a good thing, right? We are trying to show that we are listening to what we heard on Saturday morning and afternoon, and we have translated that into some ideas for how these new plan amendment and the new zoning might work, right? We're starting to get those ideas formulated. That's what you can see on that Monday night. From there, then, we go into a mode where we are actually, by the way, we're busy taking notes on all of the issues that people bring up during those open houses. We then spend, in this case, ignore the Wednesday, we spend Tuesday and Wednesday morning refining those ideas as we're headed for the presentation on Wednesday night. So really what we're trying to get to is the framework for thinking about the centers across the community that will go into the comprehensive plan, and the ideas for how zoning might work, and resolve some of the issues that people raise, deal with the question of height, deal with the question of bulk and massing, where should the building be located on the site, what kinds of uses would theoretically be allowed, etc. So that's where we'd be headed. There is then, we spend Tuesday night working as late as it takes. Sometimes that's been an all-nighter in order to really get to successful final production. Most of our final production these days, in the old days, it was coloring. And so you'd walk into the design studio in the afternoon and all you could smell was marker, marker, marker everywhere. That's not true anymore. We color and render in the computer now for the most part. So we'll be doing our final production online. We'll have experts in 3D presentation. We'll have a guy who actually does beautiful watercolor work. Whether we decide to do any or not is an open question, but we'll be working through the issues and trying to illustrate those in the best way we possibly can to help people understand what might come in these places, what might be in the rules that would make sure that what comes is tolerable to the immediately adjacent people, right? This is a balancing act between what would actually be required economically to redevelop a site. We can say, oh, we only want one-story buildings. Well, that's fine, but guess what? You'll keep the one-story buildings you have today, if that's really what you want. If you want anything more intense, different housing products, other kinds of opportunities, then we're going to have to think about more intensity on these sites, and we'll be talking about that during the course of the week. So that final presentation would be my number 2 most important thing. Number 1 being Saturday morning, number 2 being the work in progress presentation. If you want to think about it, actually, I would say, let's see, we did this earlier today. Number 4, I think we did as the pilot center meetings, because early input is the most valuable. Number 5, then the drop-in open houses. So if you had to pick things in priority order, if you can only come to 2 things, then I would have you come on Saturday morning and Wednesday night. That would be for the general public. For you guys sitting on the committee, the one thing not here is we had agreed to hold a meeting Tuesday night, and I'm going to add it to this schedule so everybody knows that's occurring. So at 7 p.m. in the Charette space, so Harlem Road Community Center, on the 27th, that's your next meeting. You will get to see where we're at, all of the progress. We may have specific questions we want to ask you. We may want your help in framing things right so that we talk to the public about them in the right way and don't alienate them, don't offend them. But there's nothing wrong with a little bit of frankness and a little clarity about how things might play out. It is the way you use out-of-town consultants, right, is to successfully sort of, say the emperor has no clothes if the emperor has no clothes. So there's going to be an element of that to this project that we want to help vet with you. And that's what we'll be using that Tuesday night meeting for, is to show you the progress to date, make sure it sounds right to you, sounds okay, maybe a little provocative or whatever, but we're headed pretty much in the right direction. 7 o'clock. We had earlier talked about it at 6, but we backed off and wanted to just leave you at your normal time. I don't want to force anybody to try to necessarily get there early. So we backed off and said we'll start at 7. And we'll probably try to quit by about 8:30 if we can. If it has to go long because the conversation is so good, we'll go long. But I'm just worried about my beauty rest, so. Because the next day is a long, tough day for me personally during the course of the charrette. So, does anyone have questions about the schedule? And this one you have You can share, but it's a bit imperfect, and we're still working on those final couple locations, getting the working committee on here, and we're actually going to put those priorities for the public on here as well, and then it'll get posted on the web. Yes? Yes. 3, I would probably put as the pilot center meetings on Saturday afternoon. So especially if this is a resident who is near one of those things, early information more helpful than late information, right? So from that perspective, coming by early. Yes, Ramona? Yes.
Somehow we have to define that. Transitioning from commercial to residential. And third, you talked about the motion and the form-based code. People do not understand what the form-based code is, and they're skeptical of it. And it's very slow developer.
And by the time we actually have developed some ideas for them, I'm hoping this will be in better shape. I don't want anybody to take that word. If I could have, I might have actually considered putting just the word zoning in there. So I'm not even certain most people understand what zoning does. And form-based codes are simply zoning. And when we get all caught up in whether they're form-based or use-based or performance-based or all the other kinds of little sort of nuances that we get all wonky about in the profession, that's not useful to the general public. So the only idea here would be to describe the kinds of rules we use to get better urban form. So if there were a way to encapsulate that phrase in 2 words I could put on here, I would. So we did hear that comment, and we've talked about it some, and if we can figure out something to do pretty quickly here, we'll change it up. And I'm fine with calling this whole exercise a workshop if we want to. I mean, it's a week long, and so it's kind of more than just a workshop. So I don't necessarily have a cool term from somewhere else. This is the industry's term, but we can switch it up. Go ahead, Annette.
Looking it up, I would say charrette is defined as a big push, a final push to complete a project. That's the definition of the term. So if we were to somehow impart that to some knowledge, that
So-
it would make people maybe a little more comfortable.
So the
That's what
coolest
it
thing-
is, it's a big push, and that's what we're doing. We're all
If you-
getting together to
if you
make
go
that
back-
big final push.
If you go back to the origination of the term, it was en charrette, meaning in a little cart. And it was in a little cart because at the École des Beaux-Arts, famous art school, right, as you were finishing up your work for the semester, you were never done on time. And so you were still working. And you were literally working in the little cart. You were finishing your painting off as your friend dragged you back to class to have your painting ready. So literally, it started out from the little carts in which the students carted their work back to show their professors. So it is that final intensive push. In our terms, really what this thing is, you have to explain to someone else what it is. It's putting all the experts and the public in the room together. We rarely have a chance to do that. If we ran this series of meetings over the course of months, it would cost you about 4 times as much money to get the horsepower together, and they wouldn't be in the room at the same time. So we're going to have an economist who gets to come by and present his market information. If nothing else, I'll have his market information. We'll be able to present it as a team. We will have urban designers. I've got a landscape architect coming in, an architect. We have planners and code professionals from our team who will be there. We get town staff access to that. And we get access to the community. There's nothing worse than planning burnout, right? I've been to 7 meetings on that dang thing already. Nothing, I haven't seen anything meaningful yet. This is going to be some quick getting your hands down into the sausage between Saturday and Wednesday night. And the maximum extent of engagement we're asking for from the community is really come Saturday and Wednesday. And if you really, really want, come some of these other times. So it's just a way for us to compress all of that activity down into a meaningful effort that gets us over the hump of what do we want to see, what's the vision, and then what kind of tools could we apply to ensure the market gives us that vision. Because that's developers in the market who build stuff, and we only have zoning rules because they build stuff we don't like. The market likes it. It's cheap, or it's easy, or it's fast, or it's whatever. But we don't like it, so we put rules in place so we get stuff we like. That's what we're talking about here. What kinds of rules do we need? What's the vision for these places? And what kinds of rules do we need to achieve that vision? That's the whole of this project in its tiniest nutshell. So, any other questions about sort of the week that is coming up?
Can you elaborate a little bit on the stakeholder meetings on Monday?
So Monday and Tuesday, we just right this minute have time slots. I don't think we've really allocated those to anybody. Yep. Has a list of examples, yeah. So, developers and designers, commercial property, business owners, manufacturers, this is a big industrial area, residents, tiny house people, there's kind of an issue there. We talked about parking, we have sewer and stormwater meeting with city staff, we have a mayor, we have the city staff themselves. I think the only thing we've committed to, we did commit to an hour and a half for the city staff in there somewhere. The city pulled together a technical group for us during the informational stage. It was super helpful. We're going to pull those folks in again. They'll come over to Harlem Road and we'll get a chance to meet with them. But, so we're going to invite most of the focus groups that we had originally. So you guys saw the meeting notes and that stuff and whatever. So those are the same kinds of people we're going to try and pull together again. One of the things we're especially interested in that we did the last time, as you've heard from me, was young residents, right? What makes you want to live here instead of in Buffalo? Or if you live in Buffalo and you're from here, how do we get you back here, right? What can we do in these centers that is of interest to you that's going to bring you back to town? Whether, only to shop and dine, or better yet, to live. As you age out of your house, what can we do in these centers that would be an interesting, vibrant place for you to live for the active portion of retirement? All those questions, I think, we will be asked. So that's the kinds of people. If you have specific people you think we need to talk to about these issues, we're open to that. As we get the list developed, we can certainly share that with you. We could gather some track.
For example, Duncan provided me a list of architects and engineers
Great.
that he thought might be helpful.
Great.
Or other stakeholders, types of stakeholders and specific folks that you think we should try and talk to during this time frame. Let us
Send the list.
drop an email to us. Because now there's an opportunity to talk about something very specific. First time around it was general.
Yeah.
Now we got sites, we got.
So another great example would be the low impact development guy from the town who came with a set of people, trying to talk a little bit about homeless. So, maybe that will.
Could we just do this on a Friday?
You will,
So we could forward it out?
It's going to go on it, as soon as it's in a final form, it's going to go on the website.
real quick.
In fact, there is a version of it on the website, but it's not this, but it can be evolved. So, I'm not sure where you're at.
The general character of it is not changing.
It's on the website. Absolutely.
You remember I got to see the archive.
Right.
So we're trying to get the last of the places on here, one, and then we missed adding this committee meeting. That's something, our office just, went over our heads. We didn't add it on. So there's a few things that need to be revised. If we can pin down the places by the end of the week, and I think we can, then this will get posted and it can be sent to the committee, just as a PDF, and you guys can send it around to anybody. On the back side, this is supposed to be kind of self-explanatory in the sense that on the back side, it sort of says what each of the meetings are. It has a little more detail about where they're located, etc. So it's kind of a, two-page thing, even though it looks like a one-page thing. It relies heavily on that detail on the back to cover the fact that we have the 5 separate centers and we have to list all those places out, etc. So we will get the PDF of that around to everybody.
Well, I think it's our intent, once this is finalized, we'll be already the reason so we'll probably walk
we are going to talk a little later in the meeting about the ideas for how we're advertising it. So we'll get a chance to talk about that. So, are we pretty good on the charrette itself? Okay. So, yes. Oh, thanks. So, what do we want you guys to do? I definitely want you to show up Saturday morning. I want you to put your citizen hat on, and don't all sit at the same table together because you're buddies, right? Sprinkle yourselves around the room and just add your 2 cents worth, to this discussion. That's definitely important. I think the next most important thing for you guys is actually your meeting then, Tuesday night, right? And then the final presentation, right? You need to have heard the final presentation, seen how the community is responding to it, because that's what's going to help you provide input, continue to provide input to us as we develop the actual materials, right? So if I had to pick 3 for you, those are the ones I would pick. Now, you are welcome to come to every single thing if you want to. You are absolutely welcome to be at all of it. But if you can only do a limited set of things, I would say Saturday morning, your Tuesday evening meeting, and the closing presentation.
And most folks would have a far better understanding of what this is than to show up to this thing. So we're really, by design, this committee is intended to provide information to the community based on your experiences and your knowledge of what's been happening over the last several months. So take the opportunity to talk to folks that are on Saturday, filling in on the project, or if they have questions, feel free to provide answers to them, talk about what's been happening for the last 6 months or so.
There were actually, there's one other thing probably that we should have mentioned from yesterday, which is apparently the tour was a big enough hit that we should really push to put a self-guided tour up so that people could continue to get engaged that way. So we'll be working on getting that opening video and then the tour up on the website so that anybody could watch the video and then drive themselves around. It's possible that there will be future bus tours to continue that conversation, so that's also out there as a possibility. But in the meantime, the self-guided tour, I think, is something we'll try to get finished. So one of the other things that we sent you, I don't know if very many of you got a chance to kind of go clicking through the links here. But one of the things that we were trying to do, it's in our contract to do, is identify precedent developments that are like what we might want to see here. Now, of course, nothing's going to be exactly right. But what we want to do is show you something relatively recent, relatively close by if we possibly could, that is an example of what's going on. Now, I got to say, this part of the state is not seeing a huge bunch of new buildings, right? What's happening in Buffalo, for example, is fabulous reuse of existing buildings, right? I'm all for that. But that is not what's needed here. A little bit maybe in Eggertsville and Snyder, but that's not the Northtown Plaza site. That's not some of these other sites that we've got on here. These are really
gray field sites. They're underutilized, and they could have more stuff there, generating taxes to pay taxes for the rest of the residents in the community. So what we're really talking about here, we had pulled together this set. Our firm did a bunch of internet research, and we tried very hard to make sure that these places were something that made sense to us as possible precedent locations, so that we could show them to you. So, for example, the first one on the list there, and I'm hoping you can see the screen relatively well. If you feel like pulling your chair up closer, come on over and do it. If you didn't bring your good glasses tonight or whatever. Okay, we'll give it a shot here. If we're having trouble kind of explaining what's going on, then we'll work on that. So what you're looking at here is an overview of a development that looks like this, right? It's 4 stories tall. It is built in a very urban form. So here you're seeing it in the aerial, right? It's reconstruction on a site that was a mess of smaller, much less intense buildings. This is something you guys could choose to go see in, what's it take, an hour and a half? Yeah, an hour's time. So, if you're really getting into this stuff, run over there and have a look at it, right? This is real. A developer built this in Rochester relatively recently, and you could see something like this in Amherst, right? So, this is quite different from what you have built recently in Amherst, right? Your most recent similar project is the one next to the university, which is really a mixed-use building kind of sitting in a sea of parking lot, right? It's not built on a formal urban form like this on lots and blocks. It is just set there where it is. So when you went on your tour, hopefully you got a chance to see that. But this is one of those things, if you just open this PDF and click that link, you're going to get this view. Now, I don't know how many of you are Google whizzes, but there's the little man down in the corner here, right? Everybody see the little guy down there? I don't know if you've ever used him, but that's how you get to Street View. So you can drop him on any street that's blue. That means it was a place that someone drove down and took pictures, right? So we can go have a look at this development by just dropping the little guy down like that. And there it is in real life, right? So we get a chance to look at this. So the piece we were looking at earlier was 4 stories tall. This piece is stepped down to 3 stories tall. So there's something about this site that made him say it can be more intense over here and less intense over there. So we're providing you with a set of examples like this that let you have a chance to look at these individual buildings. You can walk around the site by clicking on the roadway here. So when apartments, I believe apartments, but I don't know for a fact, and I have to admit we're going to write these up. There is a little description here. Let's see. There is a hospital and a hotel near this. It is ground floor retail and apartments. So, and so there's the 3-story piece, a road, a 4-story piece. So, they felt comfortable stepping up the intensity of the development on a portion of the site, but not all of the site. These are ideas that we could be thinking about and using here. Anyway, the reason that we pulled these together is so that we could show you a few of them. Now, if you look back at the list that you've hopefully brought with you, and if you didn't, there were a few sitting around, or you can just glance at this one, you'll see that for 3 of the types of places, we only had 2 already. And 2 is as many as we really need, so those ones I don't need to talk to you about. But I wanted to talk to you about this longer list of both deep parcels and shallow parcels. and see if we could pick out ones that you were comfortable with. Now, personally, we kind of put these in order by ones we thought were the best examples. So, number one example of deep parcels, right? Lots of flexibility on what you do with the site is this college town that you've just been looking at. Number two on that list is Blueback Square, which is in West Hartford. So, Blueback Square sits here. It actually is an infill that goes around a church that they couldn't buy. The church didn't sell in the end. So it became an in-holding in the project, but they did a great job of retaining access to and use of the church, and they actually allow the church to use the parking deck. They built a beautiful park embedded in it. It happens to have Whole Foods Market, you know, so there are some similarities to what might be going on in the Amherst region. And so Blueback Square is the next example we wanted to share with you. The kinds of things you can do on deep and large parcels are quite different than the kinds of things that you do on shallow parcels. So this is the kind of development we're seeing here. This is fairly significant intensity in comparison to what's going on in Amherst right now, but not necessarily crazy intensity. You know, this isn't even as much as the Wyndham, I don't think. So these are things that the development community would bring to this marketplace if we had a place for it, etc. So thinking about things like how do these streets work, how do the sidewalks work, how do the buildings relate to the street, all of those are questions for this conversation, right? There is a model of this same stuff that says there's a bunch of big parking lots out front and they're all plunked down kind of in a bunch of parking lots. To my mind, it's not as successful a model, but if in the end that is the community-determined appropriate model for this place, then we'll code for that. We can code for the parking lot in front, the parking lot on the side, the parking lot behind. We have all of these options that we have to work through. So Blueback Square is my second favorite example to share with you for this kind of a deep and large parcel. Does anybody see a problem with using something out of West Hartford as sort of the other key example? I think we'll keep all of these, so we'll keep the other 4 that are included here and allow people to click away to those. But when we do our little picture sets, we're only going to try to do 2. In fact, that's because my contract says I only have to do 10. So I'm going to try to get back to doing 10 little vignettes in which we describe the development program for each of these sites and sort of what's going on there a little bit for all of you. Do you feel comfortable enough with what you've seen of this example for us to include it for the deep and large parcels? Car dealers, principally. This is all redevelopment. So there were small buildings. There were large blocks that were used solely for parking for car dealers. It was scraped, yes. The only existing piece is the church that was retained, yes. The interior roads are brand new. The exterior roads are the same. So they rebuilt the streets and the sidewalk portion along the major roads on the outside, but inside the development is all new. Hold on. So outside the development, right, the big pieces stayed the same, but for example, they cut in a bay of parking here, and these internal roads were recreated anew. If earlier we had we went to, if you're really wonky and you get into it, Google Earth. Now you can go back in time to their oldest photos. Some of those are in the 80s and 90s. We went back in time and looked, and most of like this and I think this were big, huge surface parking lots for car dealers. There are actually in those upper stories. They are. No, I don't believe
How about this? It's smaller than the Boulevard Mall site.
West Hartford Center is
And so I guess one important note that is worth looking at real quickly about this place. The cute stuff, if you know West Hartford at all, is here on Farmington to the west. This is the cute little restaurant and bar district. Well, I happened to pick the CVS, but it's about the least cute thing. Most everything else is very trendy and very nice. So this is coming down, and to the right is Blueback Square. So imagine the village of Williamsville, and what could you do near that? Something like Blueback Square? I don't know, perhaps. Anyway, this we would like to use as an example. Again, we think the intensity is appropriate, the kinds of uses that are in it are similar. We think it's a good example, and I just want to make sure that nobody goes, ooh, West Hartford, ooh, that's not Amherst, Are we okay there? It's not in upstate New York. I suspect they're wealthier than you. Yes, the whole state's wealthier than you. No, correct. Yeah. If we were to look into the back blocks here, you'd feel some similarity. So, yes, Bill. Yep. Yes. So, I think we need to face that one head on, Bill. You're right. At this intensity, it needs structured parking. You really cannot build a surface park model of this unless it looked like the University of Buffalo, right? A sea of parking, and some tiny little buildings in the center, right? It is incredibly expensive. And so, what does it take to support that? That's one of the things we're hoping to hear from the economist. But I'm pretty confident you could build something intense enough in some of your deep sites to support structured parking. But there is a break point there. 3 stories is about the max you're going to get on surface parked development. If you're trying to go higher than that, you're either building a huge sea of parking, which we have seen here before, and is not really an acceptable model in the long run, or you've got to step it up and pay for structured parking. Now, if you've got topography working for you, and unfortunately the Wyndham really doesn't, but the Wyndham's deck is only really, it's 2 stories, right, Bill? Yeah, so
imagine, if you will, that you have a big street here and the property's falling away from the big street. You can actually, in a number of places, Saratoga's got a lot of this, where you drive down the side street, you go into the lower part of a parking deck, but it has no ramp to the upper part. The upper part you just get onto from either the front street or the other side street. And that model saves you a ton of money. And so you can do what we sometimes call deck parking, which is just one layer that is naturally topographically accessed.
if you can do that, you can bring the cost down a lot. You can also do tuck-under parking in some cases. I can imagine a replacement for the Key Bank. There's plenty of room on that site. You could do tuck-under parking. You'd want to keep something in front of it along the Key Road there, along Main Street, but you could have a fair amount of parking tucked underneath that building back behind if you had chosen to build it that way, right? So there are some ways of squeaking in a little more, but Bill's exactly right. At a certain point, there's a high price point associated with this and a significant cost. And if you're also worried about the quality of construction materials, like what you'll see in a lot of these, if we went back to that College Town example, What's this likely to be, Bill? My guess is it is, right? I mean, this is actually brick. So there's a fair amount of brick detailing in these buildings, so they're reasonably expensive. But what would the typical version be? Be all drive-it in those upper stories. Perhaps not in the ground story, often in the ground story because of the fragility of drive-it. So drive-it, in case you guys don't know, it is styrofoam with a vapor barrier and then styrofoam and a scratch coat that has the color right in it. So it's super easy to put up really quick, very cheap to do things like cornices and things like that with, because you just extrude the styrofoam and, you know, put the scratch coat on and off you go. So it is a material of choice in markets where you are just barely making the building happen, right? Which might be the Amherst market. So, so are we okay? I think it is fine if these examples raise a bunch of questions. I just don't want to throw up an example that just completely raises everybody's hackles. There wasn't anything so wrong with Blueback Square or College Town that you just went, whoa, I never want to see that in Amherst. Was there? A couple things about the other four. So, yeah, so that's the risk. So hold on 2 seconds, and we'll. So if we look, for example, at Rockville Town Center. So this is actually a parking structure and a fairly intense development around a new town square. This is a new downtown for this community. It's a redevelopment of substandard sites. It's organized the way we'd like to see it, in the way that its parking is handled. There is some surface parking, but there's lots of structured parking. But it's way more intense. And so while I'd like people to look at it and understand how it's laid out and, you know, why it might be an interesting model, I'm not certain there's very many sites in town that we're going to recommend this level of intensity at. So in many ways, if I bring this out and say, this is Transit Road, this is Niagara Falls Boulevard, right? I think I'm going to get that flinch that we're a little bit worried about. It's not that I don't want to talk about it, and if we get to talking about taller heights on certain sites, if somebody handed me over the Boulevard Mall site tomorrow, I'd be talking this level of intensity, because that's all that's going to replace that is something quite expensive, right? It's going to have to be a big deal. Now, if my economist then tells me, well, that's a great idea, but you can build about this much of it this year, and 5 years from now you could maybe build this much of it, you know, and starts to tell me that I'd have to piecemeal it so much, it's just not going to happen. So we've got to look at things that are sort of economically viable in today's and tomorrow's anticipated marketplace. And therefore are a reasonable approach to these locations. Yes, yes. In our set, of course, there's much more intense stuff, but yes, in the set that we provided. Mm-hmm. So it's actually more to this. We're looking only at a small piece of it there, but oops. So there's one of your favorite uses here. Got to have names on every plaza. This is the plaza. Actually, it looks like it was at the time it was being used for skating. Skating rink inside there. But this is the little park plaza space. This has actually become the #1 outdoor yoga and baby exercise space that I have ever seen in my life. You can go here any morning on a weekday
It is filled with strollers and moms and you and that's it. It's packed. But that's what it looks like from the street. So the street view, maybe not such a bad view, right? Because frankly, the urban designers tell us people are aware of only about the first 30 feet of a building, which is about 3 stories. Okay? After that, we're not really aware of it, except that we might feel that it looms a little bit. Right? When we look down that streetscape, we see the combination of a very narrow urban street and a quite tall building, and we're not Paris. Maybe a little too Paris for many people. But that big, huge parking garage is entered right here, and there's something like 500 or 1,000 cars stocked in this building back behind. It's actually, from that perspective, pretty amazing. And that's a public-private partnership with the city.
How deep parking is
So let's just have a quick look here. So the face of this parking garage is actually active uses. So this structure is the parking garage, and this is parking in upper stories. On the other side is a big street. So let me just go back again and show you. So here's the parking structure. There's the big street. And so there's this notion of A and B streets, good streets and streets for loading and other kinds of things. They made Hungerford into the B street and said, that's big, we're not going to put a bunch of pedestrians out there, we're not going to try to make it a walkable place. The walkable place is on this side. So if we were to now go back, get here, but let's have a look. If we come back to Northtown as it once was, it's not exactly like this right this minute. Right? So this could have been the precursor site. What would have happened if we had used this one? It's a great example because actually what would have happened is, what would have happened is on the back side we had a road. So for the most part, you would have likely backed up because you would have seen your most important frontage. Now, you could have actually backed to Sheridan if you wanted. Or you could ask for development on both sides if the parcel is actually deep enough. You can get the design of a parking garage in there. So a double bay of a parking garage is about 65 feet deep. So it goes in increments of that. It'd be like 65, and then 130, and then whatever. As you're adding those bays to the parking garage, if you happen to be able to fit that in and put tenants on both ends of it, you could actually have 2 good streets. But usually, more typically, you've got one street where you just have to say, we need service to these buildings, we need access. I would like to move on and talk about the shallow ones. Okay, the big ones, I'm telling you, they're easy. Right? We've been talking about what seem like a lot of tough issues. Well, at least you have land area to make these decisions about how to make those transitions, be able to move the parking around, whatever else. Shallow sites are kick in the nuts kinds of places. So when we look at this set of shallow sites, we started really looking at those late, and because of that, we looked at places we happen to know, and especially Denver in this instance, because Denver has stuff built out under a code that we wrote. So we sort of know what the rules were that generated these places. So we're comfortable showing you some of these kinds of things. So, is there Panera Bread in town? Anybody? course there is. So, here's Panera Bread in Denver, I believe on Colfax Avenue. Doesn't tell me, but there it is, Panera Bread. You have a Panera Bread and pulled up to the street like this? Got a little bit of parking in front. So this is a really, really interesting model. Panera Bread is 1 story tall. It's a tall ground story, but it's 1 story tall, right? So the streetscape in front of Panera Bread, which is a huge drive-through opportunity, the streetscape is pretty good. Feels pretty good. You got little tables out front. It feels like a little restaurant just pulled up to the street, right? But going back to that site plan, right? These are the kinds of rules we need to think through. Drive-through. Right there's the car in the drive-through back behind. The drive-through is here. It's queued back behind here by queuing all the way up through the parking lot and around. So even at peak time, lunchtime, whatever else, the queue is pretty good, and it's not likely to be totally queued out onto your main street, even if it was a 4-lane road, so it would be a huge crisis to queue out onto the street. But this is actually a pretty dang good site plan. Now, if I'm the single-family house on the back side, I might be worried about this dumpster. We might find a different place for the dumpster location. We could talk about that. We might actually want a little more of a buffer than just that wall that's shown there. But these are all elements we could talk about. But I'm telling you, this is really good thinking to squeeze in on this kind of site, right? It's pretty amazing they actually made that thing functional that way. Normally, this would take a corner site in order to make that work. You need access to the other street to get back to the So, is this, pretty good? Could we see this along your corridor somewhere? Yeah, seems like. We kept the format of the use, a drive-through, 1-story chain restaurant. You might just say that to people. It's a drive-through, 1-story chain restaurant. What's everybody think of? Taco Bell with the double lanes around it or whatever. You're going to think the worst possible thing. But in the end, right, when you look at this, it's not half bad. It really does. It fits in with the pieces that were here. I mean, Mr. Car Wash has probably been here forever, right? Heaven knows. Car Wash immediately embedded in the neighborhood. Who would have thought that? There it is. So, is this a reasonably good example to show, to help people understand that we can have auto-oriented uses and a walkable instead? I'm backing up to residential and I got a driveway. There's the house right there. We have a period of complaints with many words, the speakers. Sure. So you got to deal with those. That's for sure. So, I'm not absolutely positive, but we can certainly figure out how those things were accommodated here. I would guess you don't hit the menu board until you're up fairways along the side. It looks in fact like maybe there's something going on. Well, there's an initial menu board. I don't know whether that's the squawk box right there. So, yeah, is that affecting this guy? It is. That's a requirement. So that helps some. But yeah, it's a squawk box. That's what the guy next door is likely to hear. So you set hours of operation, make sure this is not, open until the end of the morning. Yeah, maybe. Maybe there has to be some controls on the time. So those are the kind of things that we do with some. But is it worth raising that issue so that we can talk about drive-throughs? Do we want to sort of shake people up and say there could be a drive-through, and you could have a drive-through Starbucks in Snyder, right?
You have to have them in the village limits where we are right now.
That works next to the town. That was a choice made by the village. Whether that was the right choice or not, open question. You're not the village. You're the town surrounding the village. You want the exact same choice for your pieces? I don't know. Does this have to be everywhere? Not necessarily. It could be in specific places. Is this on those shallow parcels on the south end of Transit Road, which is the key ones we're talking about, right? Would this be fine on that segment of Transit Road? Well, the road is certainly, worse than this. If you could build something in that pulled up environment, would it be an improvement over some of the stuff that belong there now? Maybe so, right? So, I guess, the fundamental question is that kind of okay to look at and show? At least the cold weather environment is, okay.
This exercise include a look at those corridors. For example, that area along Transit Road, that is Dunkin' Donuts, the
Yep.
drive-through on that road,
Yeah.
right back over.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, during this exercise, are we going to kind of look at those and keep those or identify whether or not there's anything about those that are undesirable or people
So one of the
that-
things, absolutely, so one of the things we've been talking about is context, right? So what is context? Well, it's kind of hard to define, but at minimum, it's the other stuff on the same block base, right? That's part of what sets your context. It's the stuff behind your back fence line. That's part of the context. So yeah, I think we have to go look at each of those pieces. Now, in the case of Northtown, along Edgar Road, there are like 5 or 6 little houses there. Is that actually the context? Well, if you look at those houses, they're probably going to be replaced. So we're going to talk about re-envisioning what the right context along that edge is. On the other hand, on the other side of the road, maybe that's for both reasons. We're not even going to vaguely consider it. That stuff's staying. It's all going to be that way in another 20 years. So yes, I think we have to look up and down the road, understand the uses that are attracted to that area now, and find a way to put them in a form that we think communicates to the world Amherst's vision of itself.
Part of this would be the folks that come in and say, this is what we like or we don't like about
Yes.
the corridor as it
Yes.
stands today.
Yes. Boy, I hate that big sign on the McDonald's right there, or I hate the squawk box, or, I hate the way the drive-through goes in and it's always queuing up, or, all of those things. Yeah, those are all fair games. Let me show you the second example here, and we'll see whether we like this one fine as well. This one is a residential one. A little hard time talking to you. Just not patient enough. There we go. So here's another example along a corridor. In this instance, a fairly intense building. It's so intense we can't even see all of it. But a brand new luxury living building. Right? Now, you just built some brand new condos, right, over off of Transit Road. What's that new thing that we looked at? Are they a block or two off of Transit Road? Yes. Yes.
Along North Front.
It's not exactly this, right? It's parking lot forward model, again, it's maybe not the finest piece of luxury living. So there's a very urban residential building. So now, we were talking about parking, right? Where the heck's the parking? There's the site. We're looking at it. It is. Right? So, feet sticking out the back. So, much of the parking is actually tucked under the building. It's a corner site, so it gives them access off the main road, so that helps you a lot. Corner sites are easy to deal with. But it's fairly exciting to see something 4 stories of intensity, right, that is self-parking model. How's that work? Well, they probably have a parking reduction because of access to transit. So it's not everywhere that we can make this work quite this way, but if nothing else, we'd have a modest parking lot back in somewhere else, maybe back in behind one of the other adjacent uses, something. But is this another good example, this one being a far more intense example than the one-story example, but also trying to show that you could have something, you know, which looks like, let's go a little farther away, looks like this. Would it be okay to have something like that on some of the report?
We're primarily talking about commercial, you know, shallow parcel center we're talking about,
It's an interesting question. The market will bring it to you if you allow it to. Because, in fact, the transit road development now, a lot of it is substantially underdeveloped. Right? Single-story, large parking lot, and on. So that gives us. Thank you. So this is actually an opportunity. Whether it's appropriate for the piece of transit road we're going to be looking at, I don't know, but would at least stir comment and get us to talk about that. I mean, is that the kind of thing you want to see along Henry, along, you know, Bailey, along other corridors that are completely appropriate to have multifamily at grade? Or would you want this to be a little mixed-use building? It really wouldn't look much different if it were a mixed-use building. The ground floor would be a little taller probably, and we'd have a lot more trouble parking. We need more parking for the mixed use. But other than that, that could be a small mixed use building. The ground floor.
We mentioned Transit Trench, which is
Towards the side, either one. We can show you what some of those designs would look like as an alternate. I think it's not that I would necessarily want that building right to the street, you know, the kind of street. This street, you know, the thing that helps make this work is on-street parking. When you have on-street parking, you're more comfortable putting the building right up. If we're going to have a travel lane right there, you're going to want wider sidewalk and a little more space in the back that will not really. So we'll look at some of those examples probably as we go through it. But it's good to start with sort of the extreme, the most walkable thing, and say, could we ever imagine that coming in? Yes? No? You know? Bailey? Why not? There you go. So there's the kind of reality that we're going to get by walking through the shred exercise, right? So
design standards for Main Street, that wouldn't be conducive to the character of Snyder or even Amherst. That type of building.
because,
It's ugly.
okay, so some design standards beyond simple form might be necessary in order to keep the character of the
So we're
place.
gonna start doing this, I'm gonna, you gotta use this, so otherwise it's just. That's all right, no, it's fine, we just want to make sure we don't.
Just say it one more time and I'll answer on my microphone so we've got it on the tape.
This type of building, I don't think it would be conducive for Main Street and Snyder or Amherst. Because it doesn't conform with the current character of the corridor.
Okay? So, definitely the kind of thing that we want to talk about during the charrette week. So great, and I'd like to actually show it, if nothing else, to prompt that kind of discussion. Now, this is not the example for traditional node development that we were proposing to use. There are actually two other examples, one from Irondequoit and one from Saratoga Springs, that we'd like to use for our traditional nodes. And then we've got a couple of examples for suburban nodes and a couple of examples for the Williamsville Edge. So we just want to get to the point where we pretty much think that these are okay. Now, I guess what I'd like you guys to do is, if you know of anything else, if you're in the know and you know another great project, I am glad to expand the list of links to more stuff. I'm still only going to do a little picture book of the 10 that we are kind of talking about picking, being the top 2 of 1 and 5 here, and then the other ones that you see there. So we'll write those up a little further, include a few little pictures in a little couple-page layout of each of these, so that everybody else can get to them without needing to click on the internet. But I'm also glad to add more clickable links here if you guys know other projects that we ought to be showing off. Now, one example that we got today, and I apologize, Kelly brought these in, is sitting at your place there. This is a rail driven option that happened in the DC area, it's a great example when you look at the top picture, right, and then you look at the bottom picture, like, wow, that got a lot better. Not only that, it's paying a lot more taxes, which should be a key thing we should be interested in this community. So it is Fairfax County. It's a little more expensive than here, I'll give you that. And it is a real rail station on a real metro line. So it's different in that regard. But and if we can successfully pull decent images, a lot of the old images are really bad quality, unfortunately. But if we can pull decent befores, we'll try and pull some more before and after so that people can see what's being replaced. So if you're somewhat comfortable with that, we're gonna move ahead and use that set for our precedent sites. And I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about the outreach for the charrette a little bit. Is that okay with you guys? We've kind of burned up that issue? Okay. If you happen to think of some more examples and you want to just send an email link, for example, to Dan, or it could clearly get to me and we'll just add it to the list. I don't think we can have too many precedents, so feel free. If you're out there on the internet and or you're reading something, you heard about something, whatever, we're interested in all of it. So the outreach that's proposed, we're talking about some key components of the outreach, and I'm just going to outline them kind of big picture, and then I'll let Annette fill in maybe a little more of the detail. Probably the most important tool for this community is y'all respond really well to those printed notices that show up in your mail. So we're going to mail to a 600-foot radius around each of the 6 key areas. So that's not everybody who might eventually be affected. When we actually prepare the zoning and propose to change any of the zoning, of course, we'll be notifying all those people very specifically about what we're proposing to change. But for the moment, and to encourage engagement in each of the project areas, we're going to mail to 600 feet around them. The mailing will include a letter, sort of, introducing and encouraging people to come. It'll include this, and it'll include the map of the pilot sites that that you have seen this map, so that people will know what the pilot centers are. So basically, we've taken the commercial area that we're looking at, buffered in the GIS out to 600 feet, and what that generates, of course, in the places that are more residentially dominated, Eggertsville and Snyder, is a lot more names on the list than when you go out here and you got these big old commercial parcels and they're all under consistent ownership. So we're not quite certain. We've run some of that, and we're going to check it out before we commit, but we think we're going to be able to notice all those people. So that's one mechanism, and that will get the immediate property owners. It does not go to tenants. So the tenants of those commercial spaces are part of another effort that the planning staff is going to end up undertaking. So we intend to do an 11 by 17 poster that could go in shop windows, and there will be this piece which could be posted up on a little bulletin board if they had one. So we hope to go, not me, we hope the staff will get a chance to go door knocking in each of these areas, let people know this thing is happening, tell them about the specific periods in which they can be engaged, and ask them to post it so that they can become champions for us in trying to bring in more people to the event. So we're hopeful that that will be a successful way to talk to the business community. In addition to that, there'll be email blast of these same materials around to the typical suspects through the town. But we would also actually like to put on the hook the folks at the IDA and the folks at the Chamber and anybody else who's got a great email list, and get you, if we provide you the content for a little e-blast, get you guys to send it around to your constituencies and encourage them to get engaged. So we're hoping you will do that. We'll be glad to share that, frankly, with every one of you, and if you want to send it around, to your personal friends and folks that you think would be important to get there, it doesn't hurt for them to see it twice. It really doesn't, and especially if it comes somewhat personalized from someone. So e-blast is another one of these mechanisms. Social media being the final mechanism that we're likely to use. We have a website. We have a small Facebook following, right? But
Twitter and Instagram.
Okay, so we have some additional social media options. Those will probably kind of light up during the charrette. That's one of the things that we often do, is we'll be readily engaged during the charrette. We'll be showing people little teaser pictures of stuff we're working on and trying to get them in and comment on those kinds of things. Might send out some questions for people that get them to start to think and get them to come in and talk to us. So that's the kind of thing we'll be doing, we hope, over social media. Now, did I miss anything out of that set?
The only thing I would like to add is that, of course, we'll be alerting traditional media via press release. We'd like to get some broadcast media alerted ahead of time so that we can get some coverage for the event early on, so that if there's anybody that wants to attend, they'll learn about it from traditional media. I do have the posters with me, so I can pass those out. You can share them and take a look. Those are drafts, so if you see anything on there that's questionable, we still have time to change them. Those are the posters that Lee just spoke of that'll be put up in storefronts in the centers.
And I think one of the other avenues of approach here would include the homeowners association. So we'll be sure to send that to the list of homeowners associations that we have. There's about 15 to 20 of those. Frank and Jim, I don't know how often you communicate with your folks via email, or if there's another way to do that. Be happy to take your suggestions as to how to reach out to them, or hopefully you would be able to do that through whatever electronic means that you use now, if you do, to communicate with your folks. So just let us know what the best way to do that is.
Just so you know, the only thing holding us back from finalizing the schedule right now is finding those additional locations. Once we get those locked in, we're going to have a final version of that, and we'll be ready to send a package around, hopefully by early next week, that you guys could share around. So any questions or suggestions about how we might enhance the outreach? Is there any, I mean, I'm not going to the Bills game between now and then, but is there some kind of event that might be going on or something else that would be a good way to let people know this is happening?
I'd like you to consider a pilot center number 7, the Erie County Community College Center, as far as the Worley Drive to be one of the commercial centers.
Okay. We did look at that, and we have, right this moment, we have left most of the office-dominated places off of the list, because it's actually not one of my contractual obligations. But we will be looking for tools that would help out those places. I think there are a number of sites throughout the town that are office-dominated now, and could use a little help, just like the commercial centers could use a little help.
But it's a part of the One Region Forward that this project ties into the town of Clarence, Lancaster, and Cheektowaga.
Yes.
Has to do with the traffic mitigation. They've got some $100 million that they're giving away for initiatives, and this is a part of the Congress of New Urbanism, the picture of Main Street, the One Region Forward. This is a demonstration project that ties into a statewide multimodal transportation system.
Thank you. Yes.
I just wanted to suggest reaching out to churches in the community. This is a very church-going population.
Happen to have good links?
Not
Is there a
personally.
council or something that exists?
In Amherst, I don't think so, but at least the key churches in the demonstration areas.
We also did talk about some courtesy notice, and that would include the adjacent communities. So we need, Tonawanda on the one hand, and anybody who sits on the boundaries of these project areas. We also talked about how to reach out to the university, so we've got some connections there through geography and planning that might be helpful. So we're going to try that. And yes, we can certainly, the reason I started that was to say we're hoping to reach out as well to like Damon College, because it's right near one of the project areas. So we'll try to expand that idea a little bit and see. Yes, absolutely.
Lee, I'm thinking maybe we should hit all the colleges in town.
Yeah.
Student activity centers.
Yeah.
With these posters.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Yes. On it. Let me bring a microphone back.
Well, I can't help but notice that would leave out about 3/4 of the town residents in terms of notification. So certainly it should go on the town's website prominently on the homepage. Also, any committee meetings, it should be announced. Any town board meetings, any planning board meetings, even sending a notice to all committees so they could tell people who come to their meetings. This is a town-wide initiative. Everyone in the town should be informed so that they can come to these charrettes, especially if you expect it to be transferable to other areas.
Thank you. Any other closing thoughts on the public outreach question? So, Dal, I'm going to hand you back the microphone.
Thank you, Lou. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a little tired now listening to all this, okay? But it was a great presentation. You did a great job. Thank you very much. A couple of housekeeping things. The notes from the last meeting. Did everyone have an opportunity to look at the notes for the last meeting? Are there any additions or deletions or corrections needed? Okay, if there are none, we'll have them posted on the website. Just a reminder, I don't think I have to go over the design charrette dates again. Joint committee meeting, as Lee said, is very important, on Tuesday, the 27th, at 7 o'clock at the Harlem Road Community Center. The technical committee will meet on October 5th, and the working committee will meet on October 26th. Okay? Any additional comments from the public? Yes, Mary? I'll get her. I'm coming. Slow but sure. I can't walk faster.
Look like they're deeper than a lot of our shallow lots, especially on transit. And one way to get around that is maybe to have connections to all the driveways so that people have lots of opportunities to get in and out. Personally, I'm questioning how this increased intensity fits into a regional aspect, why we're competing with Buffalo. We're a suburban community mainly, and I'm really questioning how these are going to relate to the rest of the town in terms of commercial centers.
Anybody want to answer that? No? Okay. Unanswerable. To be determined. Hopefully, after we go through this whole process, we'll have a better idea how it will all fit together. Okay, very good. It's 8:45. I think it's time to adjourn unless anybody has any comments or questions. If not, see you at the charrettes.
part of the $161,000 project. And, that's right here. That this ties into all the, let us get first. Some of them public project right, that's why we're, part of the, pilot project where the, Erie County, Community College Center, especially one of the centers, we're looking at our next page, also, very good. You should have heard it yesterday. I did. What's in the yeah, the college. Yeah, I don't know if I can help you. Right. But I, yeah. Thanks, you guys appreciate it. Thanks so much for the memo and stuff too. I just wanted to show you,
Just that it's